Just saying that I truly appreciate the work of the men and women of the United States Coast Guard and the men and women of the U.S. Southern Command and the work that you're doing on behalf of our nation. But this will be the second time in the same number of hearings with the Coast Guard where I've expressed grave concerns about the extent of what we as a nation ask you to do. I think you're spread much too thin. We heard testimony in the last hearing and before the subcommittee about your participation in freedom of navigation missions to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. I just came from a national security conference in Singapore. I get the importance of that mission, but I question whether or not the Coast Guard should be in the Strait of Taiwan and the South China Sea when the Navy, which has a budget 200% of your budget, ought to be doing that. Earlier this year, Admiral Schultz, in his State of the Coast Guard, recognizing that you're a modestly funded organization, stated that you are approaching a tipping point, and not only because of an aging fleet, but also because of a very small operating budget. While the Coast Guard may have resources to interdict 20 to 30% of drugs flowing through the transit zone, the GAO noted that for the period in fiscal year 2009 to 2013, the Coast Guard deployed cutters used for drug interdiction for fewer days than planned, and that maritime patrol aircraft hours were below target levels. These factors likely contributed to the lower actual percentage of cocaine removed. Since fiscal year 2009, the Coast Guard has set its own internal annual performance target for cocaine removal from non-commercial vessels in the transit zone. The service has achieved its performance target only once since fiscal year 09, and for fiscal year 2018, the Coast Guard set its annual performance target for cocaine removal at 10%. This is the lowest the Coast Guard has set its annual performance target since fiscal year 2010. Several factors impact the ability of the task force to meet the drug interdiction performance targets. One of them is the inability of allied nations to consistently commit assets, and the other is the insufficient inventory of vessels and aircraft available to support operations. So my question, Admiral Abel, and whoever would like to join in the response, can you talk a little bit about the allied nations' inability to consistently commit assets? And can you speak to, and that's probably where I'd really like you to focus, because I think you've already begun to address the insufficient inventory of vessels. But tell us about our allied partners.
Yes, sir. I'll go ahead and start. We have tremendous partnerships in the region. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Interagency Task Force South has up to 20 partner nations that are participating with representatives in JADF South, helping us with detection and monitoring. We have great relationships with almost all the countries in the region that are some way affected by illegal narcotics. I'll give you a couple of vignettes. Guatemala has made maximum use of some of the 37-foot Boston whalers that the U.S. helped them procure. They are taking those Boston whalers out 200 miles to interdict illegal narcotics, and we've seen the interdiction rates for Guatemala skyrocket. They're being very effective. Same with Costa Rica. Costa Rica just participated in a joint international operation run by JADF South. That operation, a 45-day operation, interdicted 36 metric tons. Costa Rica was involved in 10 of those metric tons.
So let me just jump in here, and I definitely appreciate the illustrations of where they're doing well, but is it accurate to say that the inability of allied nations to consistently commit assets is what is one of the contributing factors to our inability to meet performance goals for drug interdiction?
Sir, many of our partner nations have limited capacity, just as we have limited capacity to only target 20% of known movement. So there is a limited capacity throughout the region.
Okay. You know, I'm not trying to get into the, like, are they doing 2% of the GDP like we do, you know, with our NATO allies in Europe, but if our allies in the region aren't doing it, and you guys are spread way too thin, you're doing a wonderful job, but we're asking you to do a little bit too much. We need to get our allies to step up a little bit more.
Yes, sir, and maybe the best way to answer the question is that JADF South is sourced at about 29% of their ship requirements and about 21% of their aviation requirements. We need more ships and we need more planes. Those can be U.S. ships, U.S. planes, partner nation planes, and partner nation ships.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.